Welcome to the online public scoping meeting for the Pine Valley Water Supply Project. My name is Paul Briggs. I'm the field manager for the Bureau of Land Management in Cedar City, Utah. I want to thank everybody for joining today. Hopefully, over the course of the next hour, we'll provide you with an overview of the proposed Pine Valley Water Supply Project. We've allotted time to answer questions live at the end of the presentation. I've asked Dan Fletcher, our assistant field manager here in Cedar City field office, to join us during the Q&A session to help answer any resource-specific questions y'all might have. During this meeting, only speakers will have their microphones and video cameras active. I'm now going to turn the time over to Michelle Campo. Michelle is a lands and realty specialist for the Cedar City field office and the project manager for this proposed right-of-way project. Michelle's going to outline the process and what we hope to achieve with this meeting.
Thank you, Paul, for that introduction. Before we begin our scoping presentation for the Pine Valley Water Supply Project, we want to cover a few how-tos with you. You may submit questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A button. This sends your questions and text to our team. We will do our best to respond to those questions. Please remember that these questions are separate from the scoping comments for this project. We will discuss how to submit scoping comments on the next slide. The Q&A button is located at the bottom of your screen. If you do not see this button, you may need to hover over the bottom of your screen to see what is available to you. Questions received during tonight's presentation will be answered one of two ways: through the Q&A or live at the end of tonight's presentation. Since we are using Zoom to host this meeting, we will use Zoom's chat window to provide you with links and other information to supplement what is being shared by the speakers. You can make this available for viewing by clicking the chat button located at the bottom of your screen. Closed captioning is available through Zoom. This is located at the bottom of your screen and can be turned on and off by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. A public meeting documents with information presented tonight is on the project website. The location to the project website has been shared in the chat box. How-tos continued. We briefly talked about the difference between a question for this meeting and a scoping comment. On screen is the email and mailing address for you to submit scoping comments for this project. Comments received during the scoping process will help identify any other alternatives or issues that should be considered for this project. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be available on the project website. A link has been provided to you in the chat box. For those of you listening to a recording of this meeting, please do not post questions in the comment section. Contact our staff if you have any questions on how to submit comments if the comment period is still open. We will cover what scoping is on the next slide. As a reminder, the URL for the project website has been posted in the chat window. The project's website includes information about how to contact our team. Please reach out to our team if you have additional questions to be answered or to answer any questions that we did not respond to during this meeting. Remember, questions submitted here are specific to this meeting and do not constitute a formal scoping comment. What is scoping? For background purposes, the environmental impact statement process was initiated with the publication of the Notice of Intent. The Notice of Intent for the Pine Valley Water Supply Project is available on the project website. A link to the project website has been added to the chat box. So, what is scoping? Scoping is the process by which the Bureau of Land Management solicits internal and external input on issues, impacts, and potential alternatives that will be addressed in the environmental impact statement. What is an issue? An issue has a cause and effect relationship with the proposed action or alternatives. An issue is within the scope of the analysis. An issue has not been decided by law, regulation, or previous decisions And an issue is amenable to scientific analysis rather than conjecture. Scoping also helps being identified incomplete or unavailable information and evaluating whether that information is essential to a reasoned choice among alternatives. Scoping is one form of public involvement early in the National Environmental Policy Act process. The information will help us prepare a draft environmental impact statement, which will likely be published early next year and announced through the publication of a notice of availability and shared on the project website. In summary, while many issues may arise during scoping, not all of the issues raised warrant analysis in the environmental impact statement. Next, I will hand the remaining of tonight's presentation over to Paul Briggs.
Thanks, Michelle. Just get right into it with the applicant's objective. The applicant is the Central Iron County Water Conservancy District, and the applicant's objective is to develop water rights that they've acquired in western Beaver County, Utah, and transport the water to Cedar Valley Basin by constructing and operating a water conveyance system intended to add additional water to an aquifer basin that's being utilized in excess of safe yield. So you may ask what safe yield is. According to the Utah Division of Water Rights, the Cedar Valley Aquifer has a safe yield of 21,000 acre-feet a year and is currently being pumped at 28,000 acre-feet per year, which results in a 7,000 acre-foot per year deficit. The slide above shows population growth of Iron County over the last 110 years based on United States Census data. As you can see, the population is growing rapidly and the trend is only expected to continue. The purpose of the Pine Valley Water Supply Project is to provide additional water to a growing population within Central Iron County Water Conservancy District boundaries, to not only resolve the deficit and return the aquifer to a safe yield, but to provide for future growth and development as well. So for more information about the applicant's need and their objectives behind the project, please visit the URL provided in the chat box. Purpose and need. Receipt of the application results in the Bureau of Land Management's purpose and needs. We've received an application from Central Iron County Water Conservancy District for a right-of-way in Beaver and Iron counties in Utah. The right-of-way would authorize Central Iron County Water Conservancy District to construct, operate, maintain, and terminate a water pipeline and the associated facilities located on federal and non-federal lands. The BLM purpose and need is to review the application, conduct the proper level of analysis, and issue a decision either approving, denying, or approving with modifications the right-of-way application for the proposed project. This obligation is established for the Bureau of Land Management as part of our responsibility under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act in 1976. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 76 established policy and direction for multiple use and sustained yield management of public lands. This preliminary purpose and needs statement will allow the BLM, our staff, and other agencies in the public to give more focused input on potential alternatives. Project overview. This slide shows the proposed project location and land status. It's hard to trace. I'm sure you guys can't see the little legend on that map very well. So for land status purposes, Bureau of Land Management managed lands are shown in yellow. State of Utah administered lands are shown in blue, and private lands will show up there as white or with no color. Really roughly working from north to south, the north end of the map, the upper corner of the map, you can see would be the wells, associated solar development, power lines, access roads, and feeder lines that would take the proposed development water into the main trunk line, where it would follow it to the south to a high spot where it would where it would be pumped to a large storage tank and would then be gravity fed down the rest of the corridor into the Cedar City Valley, where it would be used to supplement water in the Cedar City Basin. The Bureau of Land Management has determined that the proposed project is a major federal action requiring the preparation of an environmental impact statement, due primarily to the potential effects to groundwater and other existing water sources in the area. I'd like to point out here, we have had some confusion from the public. I'm sure everybody's on board with this, but there are multiple Pine Valleys in Utah. We have had some inquiries about this being the Pine Valley in Washington County, the Pine Valley Mountains, north of St. George. This is not that area. If there's any confusion on that, this is the area out in western Beaver County, Pine Valley in the West Desert out there. The environmental impact statement and the decision regarding the application is delegated to the district manager level for Color Country District, Utah Bureau of Land Management. A project overview, handout, maps, shape files, draft plan of development, and the other documents are available on the project website. A link to these documents has been provided in the chat box. Current alternatives. The Bureau of Land Management is currently considering two project alternatives: the proposed action alternative as submitted by the applicant and the no action alternative. Under the proposed action alternative, the Bureau of Land Management would issue a right-of-way grant for the construction, operation, maintenance, and termination of the proposed pipeline and the associated facilities. The proposed action alternative consists of the facilities I've previously mentioned under the plan of development, which includes 15 groundwater production wells, 10 of which would be on BLM managed lands, 8 groundwater modeling wells, existing and authorized under previous permit, approximately 12 miles of power distribution line co-located with the pipeline corridor to power production well pumps, approximately 9 miles of access roads along the pipeline route to the production and monitoring well sites, a 200-acre solar field located on privately owned lands designed for power generation to power the pumps in the facility. Underground water storage tank, as I mentioned, installed at the high point at the southern edge of Pine Valley, and approximately 66 miles of main, lateral, and transmission water pipeline, of which approximately 43 miles is proposed on Bureau of Land Management administered lands. The pipe would vary between 16 and 54 inches in diameter, and as I previously mentioned, water would be gravity fed from the storage tank through the pipeline to Central Iron County Water Conservancy District system in the Cedar City Valley. The water rights secured by Iron County would provide them the opportunity to pump up to 15,000 acre feet per year of production. Under the no action alternative, the Bureau of Land Management would deny the right-of-way application filed by Central Iron County. Central Iron County Water Conservancy District would pursue other options addressing the water deficit within their district, which may include conservation measures, purchasing agricultural water rights, and many other options available to them. Feedback received during the public scoping period may inform the development of additional action alternatives for consideration in the environmental impact statement. The photo on the right side of your screen shows the location in Pine Valley, representative of where the project would be constructed. The proposed action continued. As depicted in the diagram on your screen, the proposed project would be a 50-foot wide right-of-way for a term of 30 years with the option for discretionary renewal. The Central Iron County Water Conservancy District has requested an additional 70-foot wide temporary right-of-way along the pipeline corridor for construction purposes. The combined right-of-way width during construction would be about 120 feet. As you can see from the diagram, the pipeline would be buried to a minimum of 4 feet of cover. The following slides, the next few slides, are resources that have already been determined by BLM to be potentially affected. by this proposed action. Groundwater resources. So the District Court approved Central Iron County Water Conservancy District's application for water rights filed in 2006. An adaptive management strategy is being developed as potential mitigation as part of this draft EIS effort. There's currently not enough data to know precisely the groundwater drawdown which might result from pumping. An adaptive management strategy will address that in the environmental impact statement. The strategy will identify decreased pumping levels should monitoring indicate that groundwater is being drawn down below acceptable levels. The United States Geological Survey is providing technical guidance and review of the groundwater impact assessment for development of this draft EIS. The map on your screen shows areas for groundwater modeling. The larger polygon or grayer area on the map is the Great Basin Carbonate and Alluvial Aquifer System, which is modeled by U.S. Geological Survey. The red rectangle you see indicated within there is the more site-specific scaled down model being worked on by United States Geological Survey specific to this project. The intent is to conduct a thorough groundwater modeling that examines the distribution of drawdown over time, groundwater budget and storage changes in adjacent hydrological areas, potential regional spring discharge depletion, and potential evapotranspiration discharge depletion. Resources potentially affected continued. Greater sage grouse. The project is located in the Hamlin Valley Priority Habitat Management Area. No LEC activity has been documented in this area, in the project area, since 2015. Impacts are expected to be temporary and short-term during construction, and reclamation of temporary disturbance will be required. We expect the draft environmental impact statement to include a suite of options to achieve no net loss of habitat, which would be coordinated with the State of Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, including but not limited to the following. We would consider providing water for meadow development, fence reflector installation, perch deterrence, and other measures as appropriate. The majority of the pipeline has been designed, will be co-located with the existing Pine Valley Road to minimize additional long-term disturbance. Utah prairie dog. The Utah prairie dog is currently listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Coordination with the United States Fish and Wildlife Service regarding Section 7 consultation would be completed. Utah prairie dog surveys have been conducted along the proposed action alternative in the summer of 2019. No Utah prairie dogs were observed during the 2019 survey. Pre-construction surveys would again be conducted just prior to construction activities. Cultural resources. Our cultural resource surveys and assessments have been completed on the entire proposed action alternative route. Consultation and coordination with the State Historic Preservation Office and the tribes are ongoing at this time. Current cultural resources found during the survey, depending on what we hear back from State Historic Preservation Office, will determine on how those will be dealt with. That will all be addressed in the draft EIS. Cultural monitors could be used during construction in specific locations, depending on what we work out in our consultation with the tribes. Old Spanish Trail. The Old Spanish Trail is a national historic trail that's well known and greatly appreciated locally for its historic value. The project teams coordinated with the National Park Service and the Old Spanish Trail Association to reroute the proposed pipeline to avoid impacting this historic trail. Lands with wilderness characteristics. Section 201 of the Federal Land Management Policy Act of 1976 requires the Bureau of Land Management to maintain on a continuing basis an inventory of all public lands and their resources and other values, which includes wilderness characteristics. It also provides that the preparation and maintenance of the inventory shall not of itself change or prevent change of the management of use of the public lands. The development and associated right-of-way as currently proposed would pass through approximately 50 acres of the Steamboat Mountain Inventory Unit that BLM has determined to have wilderness characteristics. However, the current land use plan predates the inventory. The Bureau of Land Management currently does not manage this area for its wilderness characteristics. The schedule. I wanted to touch on the schedule quickly as we wrap up the scoping meeting to show the timeline for the environmental impact statement and the resulting decision. As you can see on the left side of your screen, the box marked in orange indicates where we are in the process right now. Once the public scoping comment period closes, our team will go through the scoping comments to help inform the preparation of a draft environmental impact statement. The draft environmental impact statement is scheduled to be ready for publication in the winter, spring of 2021. This will initiate an additional 45-day public comment period, followed by a final environmental impact statement and a recorded decision prior to the fall of 2021. Okay, as a reminder, questions submitted here do not constitute formal scoping comments. Comments must be submitted by Friday, August 14th, 2020. You can submit comments to the project email account, or you can mail them in. If you have additional comments, you can contact Michelle Campo, our BLM project manager. Her contact information is on the screen and can be found on the project website. I'll now turn this portion of tonight's meeting back to Michelle. Michelle will be facilitating the question and answer session tonight.
Thank you, everyone, for using the Q&A box to submit questions. We will now take the rest of the allotted time to answer questions live. If you have any additional questions, please add them to the Q&A box now. I will now read questions live. Paul Briggs and Dan Fletcher will be answering them. First question goes to Paul. Paul, will this be subject to the Lincoln County Conservation, Recreation, and Development Act of 2004, correction?
It's a good question. We did have a question submitted via email, and that's exactly why we do this. That's exactly the reason why we have these scoping meetings, is that's one of the things we'll have to look into further with our legal department and see if there is a correlation and how our acceptance and processing of this application relates to that act specifically.
All right, thank you, Paul. The next question I'm going to go ahead and answer. I'll read the question first. Per the notice in the Federal Register, the deadline for scoping comment is the later of Friday, August 14th or 15th. After the last public meeting, assuming this is the only public meeting, is the deadline for the submission of written comments now Wednesday, August 19th? Yes, that is correct. We will accept comments up to 15 days after tonight's public meeting. All right. The next question we're going to send to Paul. What is the current status, declining, stable, increasing, of the aquifers where the project groundwater pumping would occur?
Another good question, and I think the answer at this point is we don't know. That's part of the analysis that we're hoping to get the answers from a combination of the groundwater modeling that USGS is working on and the actual pumping of the aquifer over time. So that's part of what we hope to learn as we develop the process.
All right, thank you. Another question, Paul. Your purpose and needs statement seems too narrow. Can it be reevaluated to consider both demand and supply side alternatives?
So back to why we do this and why we do scoping. If that comment is submitted during scoping and we review those comments and it's determined that our range of alternatives or one of the alternatives is not broad enough in scope, or if we need to add an additional alternative to the analysis, we can do that based off what we receive from comments during this process.
All right, thank you. The next question we're going to give to Dan. Dan, how does BLM plan to ensure noxious and invasive weeds won't invade the disturbed areas?
Typically through the EIS process, a reclamation plan is developed, and this would identify a reseeding, seed mints that we would apply as part of reclamation.
Thank you, Dan. Paul, we have another question that came in. Are you going to consider water conservation instead of mining groundwater?
That question would be a little outside the scope of this current situation for the analysis. BLM doesn't dictate necessarily what the applicant would do as far as how they'd manage the water within the basin or how individual water users would manage their water. Obviously, that's something that's a good idea, but our purpose and need is to respond to the applicant and the application.
All right, thank you. Dan, we have a question for you that came in. What is the relationship between the BLM and the state of Utah in regards to groundwater, as the state has the authority to adjudicate water and monitor water withdrawals, and the BLM has the responsibility to manage the resources? If the application is for a right-of-way for the pipeline, why is water withdrawn levels being analyzed?
That's a really good question. The reason that we're going to analyze water withdrawal is because we feel like there may be impacts to springs and riparian areas within those locations, as well as BLM groundwater wells. So we want to make sure that we analyze those impacts, and a lot of that information will come through with the groundwater modeling process.
Michelle, can I add on to that just a little bit?
Please do.
Dan's absolutely right, but in addition to that, as we started, we talked about FLPMA, and BLM has multiple use responsibilities under FLPMA out there. So in these desert environments, any water out there has multiple uses and a lot of value. And so in order for us to manage wildlife, wild horses, range management, grazing, all those things, recreation out there, BLM wants to ensure that not only are the water rights and the values out there that we manage for protected, but the rights of others as well.
All right, thank you. Paul, we're going to go ahead and keep you answering this next question. Will the EIS be prepared using the new CEQ regulations?
That's a good question. As far as I know, yes, it will.
All right, Paul, will any recreation opportunities be impacted by this project?
There may be some temporary impacts to recreation. Recreation in the area, prior to this year, we've increased recreation use everywhere, but it's typically seasonal. Most of the recreation use out there is in the fall and the winter, hunting seasons and those type of things. There may be some temporary inconvenience that would result from the construction, but once the construction is complete, I don't anticipate any impacts to recreation out there. But once again, that's why we do scoping. For any information out there that we're not considering, we'd like to know.
Thank you. This next question we're going to ask Dan. Dan, will you consider, or will BLM consider, other water outlets for wildlife, wild horses, or livestock along the pipeline route?
Absolutely. Yes, that can be a consideration that we put into the EIS. Paul touched on the Music Meadow development for net conservation game for sage grouse. We could actually have development coming off of the Central Iron County Water Conservancy District pipeline that would allow for additional water for wildlife and wild horses along that pipeline route.
Thank you. Another question, Paul, will you be including the Southern Nevada Water Authority pipeline groundwater use as cumulative impacts?
I'm sorry, Michelle, can you say that one more time?
Yes, of course. Will you, BLM, be including the Southern Nevada Water Authority pipeline groundwater use as a cumulative impact?
I'm not sure. I may have to defer or get back on that, but I believe that that project was terminated and no longer is being considered. So no. However, if during this process, if something like that were to come back online and be in development, then absolutely.
All right, thank you. Dan, question to you. You mentioned several potential mitigation options for sage grouse. What types of mitigation have been found to be the most effective?
That's a really good question. We have worked with the Division of Wildlife Resources and our other partners, as long as having initial discussions with the proponent, but we were centering around the Mesic Meadow development or the fence reflectors. We also identified some pinyon juniper removal in that area, but I think the Mesic Meadow development would probably be the best in that area. Sage grouse, we have the two lets, which have had zero count for the past 5 years in the northern portion of the pipeline area. But we feel like if we have some surface water available in the bottom of that valley, that maybe we can get those sage grouse back in that area, as well as provide really good benefits for other wildlife. And we would plant those areas with highly desirable perennial forest species, and that would help promote bird-bearing habitat within that northern portion of the valley.
Thank you, Dan. And everyone, please keep your questions coming in and so we can answer them. Paul, next question. In the plan of development, phasing is part of the proposal. Please explain what this means when it comes to analyzing in the EIS.
I'm sorry, Michelle, you have to say that one more time.
Of course. In the plan of development, phasing is part of the proposal. Please explain what that means when it comes to analyzing in the EIS.
Oh, okay. So in the plan of development, there are two phases to the project. There's a different valleys, additional water development in there. If the applicant was not able to generate the water production thereafter in phase one, they would continue on to phase two of the project. This effort, draft EIS effort, is intended to cover both phases of the project.
All right, thank you. Paul, we're gonna just go ahead and roll you into the next question. Could you explain the temporary right-of-way, such as what kind of work will take place in the temporary right-of-way and why does it need to be expanded?
Okay, yeah. During construction of a project like this, they obviously have to do a significant amount of trenching. There's a stockpile of material to backfill that. They need room for staging of pipe, moving equipment back and forth. So there's equipment trying to do that within a smaller or 50-foot footprint is essentially impossible. So the temporary right-of-way would be for construction only and would be to facilitate a wider area for them to complete their construction in.
Thank you. Dan, we're gonna send the next question to you. How will you monitor impacts to native springs and what will happen if there is negative impacts to those springs that supply much needed water to native wildlife, domestic livestock, and wild horses?
It's a really good question. The BLM and the United States Geological Survey have been collecting spring flow data in Pine Valley since about May 2013. Like Paul mentioned in his presentation, at this time, safe yield is unknown, and we're not going to be able to quantify that until the aquifer is stressed. So what that means, there's uncertainties regarding the geological model, the aquifer parameters, and spring connectivity will persist if that aquifer is stressed. The state would require implementation of a groundwater management plan if the safe yield is being exceeded. What that means is if there's a decline in the springs or if there's a decline in the available groundwater wells out in that area, they would require that groundwater management plan to move forward. And the project will include groundwater monitoring wells as part of the project, which will be rolled into the adaptive management plan if that occurs. And right now, according to the data that we are getting from USGS, the groundwater is stable in Pine Valley.
Thank you, Dan. Paul, next question we're going to send to you. Are the water rights for this project already owned, or are they being applied for this project?
Water rights, as I understand it, have been applied for and have been adjudicated through the district court. There was a challenge to those water rights, and Iron County was able to prevail, or there was a settlement. Either way, they have the water rights to pursue this project, and eventually they'd have to prove up on those water rights, but they have secured what they need to move forward at this point.
All right, thank you. Paul, stay online. Will BLM share information on ownership of the private parcels where the tank and solar site will be built?
I'm not sure if BLM will, but that's information that if you have the location of those parcels, you should be able to get from Iron or Beaver County. Their recorder or assessor's offices should be able to provide that, or there's sites online where you can find that ownership information.
And I'm just going to add to that question. As part of the presentation, the solar site, it would be on land owned by the Water Conservancy District. And the tank is proposed to be on BLM. All right, Dan, next question. Will the wells be shut down if the springs dry up?
I kind of touched on that in my last response, but if there is a drawdown and it's noticeable after the aquifer is stressed and we are pumping above safe yield, the applicant would be probably required by Division of Water Rights to come up with a groundwater management plan. And that would monitor the groundwater level. And we are monitoring that groundwater level from the beginning of the project too. And that would initiate drawdown triggers for pumping management actions. And that would be defined in the adaptive management plan.
Thank you, Dan. Paul, will there be a cooperating agency group to look at this EIS? If there is, who will be invited?
Yeah, we've actually reached out and asked that question to our cooperators, and I believe that Beaver County, Iron County, Enoch City, and Michelle, help me out if there's any others, but I do believe we have at least 3 cooperating agencies, and then we have an agreement, a cooperative agreement with USGS for the groundwater modeling.
Yes, and I will just add to that that the state of Utah is also a cooperating agency as well.
Absolutely, thank you.
You're welcome. Dan, will the Fish and Wildlife Service biological assessment be available for review with the draft EIS?
Yes, it will be, and it will be posted on the website.
Thank you. Paul, next question we're going to send to you. How will the new CEQ NEPA regulations go into effect September 14th, affect the draft EIS process?
I'm not exactly sure at this time. We're still waiting to get further guidance out of our headquarters office and our state office on how exactly that's going to work. I'd have to defer that question till later and maybe revisit it at a later date when we have a little more information.
Thank you. And Paul, we have another new CEQ regulation question. There is current litigation over the new CEQ rule. If the rule is overturned or a preliminary injunction is entered against its implementation, how will that affect the NEPA review process scheduled you have outlined under the new rule?
That's another good question. We'd have to see where we were in the process, what exactly that injunction or stay or anything like that involved, and I'd have to probably consult with our legal department at that point to see what our next steps were, how that affected the process.
Thank you. Next question, Paul. Are any of the potentially affected aquifers shared with Nevada?
That's another really good question, and that's one of the main things we hope to find out with the groundwater modeling. So when we have not only the larger scale model that USGS has already developed, but the smaller model in place, the more specific model, we hope to know that if there's going to be any impact to any shared aquifers.
Thank you. Dan, the next question I'm going to see if you can answer. Has the USGS hydrological data been looked at in the proposed project and what it would do to the upper springs?
Yes, it has. The upper springs have been identified as perched springs, meaning that the project should not have any impact on those. However, through the groundwater modeling process, more information will come and that will be brought forward into the EIS.
Thank you, Dan. All right, Paul. Let me get this next question. All right. If you need me to repeat any of this, please let me. Looks like there's two questions built in here, Paul. How will possible improvements in water conservation, reclamation, and more effective use be addressed in the draft EIS alternatives? The Lake Powell Pipeline draft EIS has been properly challenged for not including any water conservation alternatives meeting future water needs. Can be and should be combined of supply and demand methods.
So that would again probably be a pretty good scoping comment if we were to receive that. We definitely consider that as part of the analysis and decide whether or not we need to include that based on the scope of this project. That's something I would look forward to seeing in our scoping comments.
All right, Paul, we're going to ask the next question for you also. Has there been any outreach or coordination with the Nevada Division of Water Resources or adjacent Nevada counties, particularly as it relates to the USGS impact analysis area and methodology?
Another question I'm not sure the answer to. As far as I know, we have not reached out to Nevada at this point. That's something we would follow up on based on an earlier question regarding that Lincoln County Act and how that clause in there would affect whether or not we need an agreement with Nevada. So that would be a good question that we could tackle in conjunction with that one.
Thank you. Dan, question for you. So if Central Iron County Water Conservancy District water wells draw the water table down and have negative impacts, what will the mitigation look like to local users in Beaver County? Wouldn't it be too late at that point, considering that there really is no chance in recharge?
As I stated earlier, right now the groundwater is stable in that area, and we are doing groundwater modeling in that area. But I think that's a really good scoping comment right there. We could identify different methodologies for making livestock water available or additional water for wild horses or wildlife. Kind of like the Music Meadow development, we could identify that in the EIS and roll that in there.
Thank you. The next question I'm going to go ahead and answer, but I'll read the question first. Will the recording of this meeting be available on the project website, that the URL that was provided for the project website? And yes, it will be uploaded on there. After this, Zoom will be uploading this to YouTube, and we will provide a link to that site on the project website. Paul, next question for you. Is Central Iron County Water Conservancy District paying the BLM to do the draft EIS? If so, how much?
That's a good question, Michelle. I think I'm going to punt that one to you.
Yes, I could answer that. So with any right-of-way project, the federal government is required to be reimbursed cost recovery. And then also part of that, we have established a cost recovery account with the Water Conservancy District. In addition, they have hired a third-party contractor that they are paying as well. Paul, next question goes to you. If Iron County can pump the water in, why can't they pump the effluent water out to replenish the water they have removed from the aquifer?
That's a good question. And I can't speak for Iron County, but theoretically they could. I guess if they were importing 15,000 acre feet a year and had a current deficit of 7,000 acre feet per year, the difference in those two would either be recharged into the aquifer or used instead of water in the current aquifer, which would allow natural recharge to bring that aquifer back up. Hopefully I've answered that question.
Thank you. Paul, I'm going to ask you this next question. Will BLM be using any consulting firms to prepare the draft EIS that may have potential future conflicts of interest in terms of bidding on design, engineering, or construction contracts?
I don't believe so. BLM, as you stated, Michelle, BLM has a contractor preparing the draft EIS with Central Iron County and BLM. I believe they have a subcontractor as well to help with the groundwater modeling. But to the best of my knowledge, and I may be wrong, I don't know what other work those contractors do. I don't know if they would do that type of work or not.
Okay, and I will just add to that, that all firms hired are required to assign a conflict of interest paper as well. Paul, next question we're going to direct to you. If Iron County can pump, oh, sorry. Dan, I'm going to send this question to you. What will happen to livestock permittees for these areas?
In the project area, there are 13 allotments and 16 livestock permittees. The season of use within those allotments is variable. There are winter grazing and summer grazing allotments, and we have both cattle and sheep within those allotments. There's a considerable amount of private ground in those allotments, and there's multiple pastures through those allotments as well. So we feel like that as during construction activities, that's probably when the biggest impact to the livestock permittees will occur. So I think that we can work with our permittees in our annual operating instruction meetings to make their grazing schedule flexible within the intent of the permit, and that we really won't have an impact on their livestock operation. As far as reclamation, we will reseed those areas, and as we just discussed in the presentation, the majority of the pipeline is going to be co-located with the Pine Valley Road. So that area is disturbed already just right off the road. So I think we can be pretty flexible with the permittees and work with them and still get that rest on those areas that we need.
All right, thank you. And just for clarification, I just got word that we were not able to connect to YouTube for the live broadcast, and which will just result in a slight posting for the project website, but it will be available on the project website, the recording of tonight's presentation. All right, Paul, I'm going to ask a question to you. How did the applicant come up with their proposed route for the pipeline? Did they, or did the BLM look at other routes?
I know that Central Iron County has done a lot of work with different engineering companies, and they've been looking at this. They've known that they've had this situation for a long time now. And I know they looked at several routes. Over time, they came up with this one that they actually nailed down close enough on the plan of development to submit with the application. I do know they looked at more than one route. I can't tell you exactly how many, but as part of this scoping process, if there are other routes out there that make more sense or other routes that should be included in the range of alternatives, it would be good to know that.
All right, thank you, Paul. We're going to take one more question. We're being mindful of the time. It's 7:30 right now. And Paul will answer this question and close tonight's meeting. So again, thank you, everyone. Paul, the last question is, how does this project fit with the new Cedar City RMP effort?
It's a good question. The Cedar City RMP effort that's currently underway has a range of alternatives in there. Under that range of alternatives, thinking right now that this right-of-way application would not be in conflict with any of those alternatives. Of course, that's assuming that a decision was signed, that a decision came out of that RMP process, could be any one of those alternatives or a combination of those alternatives. But with our responsibilities under FLPMA, I don't anticipate that we would approve a resource management plan decision that would prevent us from fulfilling our obligations under FLPMA. With that being the last question, I want to thank everybody for your attendance. Thank everybody that helped in the panel and the participants tonight. That's all the time we've allotted for the meeting. We appreciate your time and attendance today. We look forward to hearing from you with your scoping comments.